Hello, I'm Emma Louise Coffey and you're welcome to The Dairy Edge, the Teagasc Dairy podcast. We're bringing you the latest information, insights and opinion to improve dairy farm performance. This is the second part of our two-part interview with dairy specialist Padraig O'Connor, getting his top tips for a good milking routine. Firstly, Padraig advises us on best practice in teat preparation.
I would always say to farmers, Emma Louise, clusters have to go on to clean, dry teats. If it's wet dirt on the teats, they have to be washed and dried. That's really, really important. Okay, so clusters have to go on to clean, dry teats. Now, best practice suggests that, if we draw each quarter, to identify if there's mastitis there. And I suppose the other thing that does is, it stimulates the cow as well. Now, in saying that, a lot of farmers aren't actually stripping cows. And I think, the message coming through to me from the farmers is that it's down to a time issue. Okay, but best practice does suggest that we strip cows. However, just to recap, clusters have to go on to clean, dry teats. I suppose the method, if we move on to putting on the cluster, then it's really important, that when you're putting on the cluster, that you minimise the amount of air that leaks into the teat cups. That's really important. Otherwise, you could have air blasts going up through the teat that's to be connected onto the last of the teats. So it's really important that you minimise the amount of air that gets in when you're putting on the cluster.
What is the negative effect of an air blast, Padraig?
Yeah, the negative effect, Emma Louise, would be that you're going to have more mastitis. It's going to damage, over time, it's going to damage the bottom of the teats. So when the bottoms of the teats are damaged, you're certainly going to have more mastitis.
And then in terms of, looking at the operator, and I know that you've spoken previously about repetitive strain injury. Can you explain what exactly you'd mean by that, Padraig?
Well, I suppose really that's where you're lifting a cluster with the same hand all the time. So what we refer to that as repetitive strain injury. So I have come across, especially farmers that are milking cows for a number of years now, that they have pain in their shoulders, they have pain in their wrists, maybe their hips are at them or whatever like that. And some of that is certainly down to bad technique. So I suppose, one of the ways to reduce that is if you can swap hands. So in other words, if you're putting clusters on to the right-hand side of the parlour, you're holding the cluster with the left hand. And if you're putting clusters on the left-hand side of the parlour, you're holding the cluster with the right hand. And I suppose maybe just to refer to, which is the right-hand side of the parlour and which is the left-hand side of the parlour, always look in the direction of the cows, with your back to the collecting yard.
And I suppose what you're typically seeing on farm then is where there is no rotation of hands. You're relying heavily on one hand more so than both, and there's just a strain happening there.
Yes, absolutely. And I suppose an example that I give is, for example, if you're milking 100 cows, and, some of the clusters out there currently that we have in Ireland are 3 kgs. So that's 300 kgs you're milking per milking. If you're milking twice a day, that's 600 kgs you're lifting with the one hand. Over a week, that's over 3.5 ton. So it's as some farmer said to me recently, if it was a machine, it would be banjaxed. Do you know what I mean? So I suppose it's just, and I know that farmers will tell me, look, it's difficult to try to change hands, particularly if you're milking for a number of years. And while I agree with that, I think there's still merit in trying to change.
And I guess there is that saying that it takes 21 days to form a habit. So it's a matter of giving it a bit of time, Padraig.
Absolutely, Emma Louise. And I think that's what, that's where farmers fall down. They expect, that they'll be able to do it in 2 or 3 days. And that's not, that won't happen. So I would say to farmers, if you break it down, on one side of the parlour you're going to be fine because currently you're holding the cluster with one of your hands anyway. So that half of the milking is going to be fine. You're going to find it strange with the other half, trying to put on the cluster with the hand that you haven't been used to holding the cluster with. So that is going to take a while. It's really perseverance. And yeah, you're 100% right in terms of it takes at least 3 to 4 weeks to change a habit. So it's just to persevere with it.
In the final topic that I wanted to touch on with you, Padraig, was looking outside the physical parlour and looking at the other facilities that can help and assist in creating a good milking environment. And if we look at different things like, you mentioned the collecting yard, and cows are standing in the collecting yard for, up to 50 minutes to an hour, twice a day. What sort of impact do the facilities outside the milking parlour have on a good routine?
Absolutely massive, Emma Louise. It really has. Facilities. I suppose there's 3 key areas. One is the facilities, the roadway track. 2 is facilities, and number 3 is the person that's actually managing the milking. But just going back to facilities, for example, the collecting yard is one very, very important part of that. And I think the important issue there is, the key issue there is to make sure that the size of the collecting yard will hold all the cows without any cows actually going up into the milking parlour itself. And I suppose you're talking about at least 1.5 square metres per cow in terms of the space that's needed in the collecting yard.
And then, what sort of an impact will that have on cow flow, Padraig? Like if we think about it, where, the majority of collecting yards are adequate or else on the small side, what sort of impact do we see with those facilities on cow flow?
What happens in the collecting yard when the cows come into a collecting yard is that there's a little bit of reorganisation taking place there. So the cows need to move around a little bit within the collecting yard so as to find their spot, to find their space. So, if the cows that are coming up along the roadway first out of the paddock may not necessarily be the first cows to be milked. So if you don't have a collecting yard that's sized properly, you will have a certain amount of stress. You'll have more lameness as a result as well. And if you have stress, you'll have a higher cell count. So I suppose those 2 points, you'll have it'll impact on their feed and it'll impact on milk quality as well.
And speaking of the collecting yard, what sort of a function has a backing gate? And are you pro backing gates, Padraig? Do you think they work effectively on farms?
Yeah, backing gates are a very useful implement to have in the collecting yard if used properly. And I suppose that's the important point. The backing gate really is used to decrease the size of the yard, not force the cows into the milking parlour. And I suppose that's a really, really important point. I suppose just a couple of points in relation to the backing gate, which I have seen around farms as well, is one, when you turn on the backing gate, there should be a system in it whereby it only moves a metre or 2 metres and it cuts out automatically. Sometimes what can happen is that the milker is milking, turns on the backing gate, a cluster is kicked off maybe further up the parlour and forgets about the backing gate or forgets about that the backing gate is on. So in other words, that can crush cows. I suppose the second point is in relation to, and the farmers find this very advantageous as well, is when the backing gate is moving, there's some kind of a siren on the gate to indicate that the gate is moving. Cows will also associate the noise with the movement of the gate, and automatically, they will move up towards the entrance to the parlour itself.
And finally, Padraig, I know that you have engaged in training and I suppose demonstration of best practice for farmers. If we consider the dairy farming population across Ireland, there's farmers of all ages, young and old. Regardless of age, is there merit in farmers engaging in a refresher course to, I suppose, re-educate themselves and update themselves on best practice?
Yeah, certainly, Emma Louise. I suppose we can all get a little bit complacent and a little bit stale. And I suppose by doing, this refresher course or the milking course, it will help us to up our game again. I suppose, the other thing is that, with new technologies coming on stream as well, it's important to know about them. Do they fit into our system? How can we improve? I suppose from an employer's point of view, it's getting something back to staff as well in terms of, I'd like to do this refresher course and I'll pay for it. And I think that the employers, will actually see better performance as a result of that. And maybe, more efficient ways for doing particular tasks at the milking and so on.
I think that's a great note to finish on, Padraig. And I suppose, food for thought for farmers across the country. Look, I think we've had a very broad discussion. We've covered an awful lot of topics that I suppose have a huge impact on, routine and milk quality, and, where we're getting these things right, it will have a really advantageous effect on the bottom line. So thanks very much for all your tips, Padraig.
Thanks, Emma Louise.
And that's it for this week's episode of the Dairy Edge podcast. And my thanks to Padraig O'Connor for joining me on this week's show. Don't forget to rate, review and subscribe to the podcast. You can listen on Apple and Google Podcasts as well as Spotify. And for more information, go to the Teagasc website at teagasc.ie. I'm Emma Louise Coffey, and join me next time for your Dairy Edge.